Well, temperatures are sitting in the 20s today. It's balmy outside. Get your suntan lotion on here in Iowa City. But the Iowa Highway Patrol has issued an advisory for winter weather, and sleet is coming down in sheets. I'm Sean. Well, why not sit back for the next 15 minutes or so with an episode of Radio Ranger? Why not join me then next to the warm glow of your radio? And this is Radio Ranger in glorious stereo from my home in Iowa City, Iowa. In this weekly program, I highlight a broadcast radio program that you can tune into in your local listening area or stream online. I share reflections and memories of how each of these programs has had an impact on me in hopes that you decide to give it a listen to. Maybe it'll become a part of your regular routine. The goal of Radio Ranger is to keep radio alive and encourage radio listenership. I'll also play music or hand-selected shows from the golden age of radio. Well, thanks for joining me this Sunday evening and sharing a little bit of time with me. And hopefully you've been taking the time to go and explore some of the radio programs that I've been sharing with you. Remember, the links that you need to find the programs, the pages, and the resources are always posted down below in the description of this show. We won't always be going down memory lane to old Wisconsin, but we frequently will. Stay tuned for upcoming programs where we'll be exploring radio programs that I've listened to in more contemporary times in Maryland, New York, Washington, D.C., Pennsylvania, and other places. Of course, all these shows are syndicated or available through online streaming. I'm always working to improve the Radio Ranger experience for you. Things that we've accomplished are a switch to stereo recording. Things that are coming down the pipeline are a better microphone and recording device, as well as LP AM broadcasting in the Iowa City area. But that's just a pipe dream for now. Pardon the pun-like reference to last Sunday's show. Well, when I was a young lad, sharing a bedroom with my older brother, we had bunk beds from the United States Navy. And I don't know if they herald back to World War II, but I think it was probably World War II or Korea. And we had these bunk beds in our little bedroom. And we would lay awake at night listening to the different radio shows we enjoyed together, sometimes secretly, as there is always a bedtime for young boys to go to sleep. Well, one particular show would oftentimes involve us having to bury our faces in our pillows to hide our laughter from our parents in the room next door. That was the Dr. Demento show from Westwood One Radio, and that is our feature program for tonight's episode of Radio Ranger.
Hello there, this is Dr. Demento. We're on the radio here. Wind up your radio. Westwood One presents the Dr. Demento Show. 2 hours of mad music and crazy comedy from out of the archives and off the wall. Rare records and outrageous tapes from yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Dr. Demento, or Barrett Eugene Hansen, as he was born on April 2nd, 1941 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, ran a radio program that started back in 1970 and has always worked pretty closely with Weird Al Yankovic. He's a record collector specializing in novelty songs, comedy, and just downright strange or unusual recordings dating from the early days of phonograph recordings to the present. Hansen created the Demento persona in 1970 while working at Los Angeles station KPPC-FM. He played Transfusion by Nervous Norvis on the radio, and DJ The Obscene Stephen Clean said that Hansen had to be demented to play it. And the name stuck. His weekly show went into syndication in 1974 and was syndicated by the Westwood One radio network from 1978 to 1992. Broadcast syndication of the show ended on June the 6th, 2010, but the show continues to be produced weekly in an online version, links to which you can find down below. Hansen was no dummy. He had a degree in ethnomusicology and has written magazine articles and notes on recording artists outside of the novelty genre. He's credited with introducing new generations of listeners to artists of the early and middle 20th century whom they might not have otherwise discovered, such as Harry McClintock, Spike Jones, Benny Bell, Stan Freberg, and Tom Lehrer. He helped bring Weird Al Yankovic to national attention. Hansen was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and was the son of an amateur pianist. He says he started his vast record collection around the age of 12, when he found that a local thrift shop had thousands of old 78 RPM records for the sale price of 5 cents each. He attended Reed College in Portland, Oregon, where he was promoted to program director of KRRC in 1960 and general manager in 1961. He wrote his senior thesis on Alban Berg's opera Wozzeck and Claude Debussy's opera Pelléas et Mélisande. He graduated in 1963 and later studied at UCLA, from which he earned that degree in folklore and ethnomusicology. Hansen would go on to spend some interesting time after college working as a roadie for the rock band Canned Heat and writing serious articles about music for such publications as Rolling Stone magazine. Well, let's give a listen to a little bit of a broadcast of the Dr. Demento Show.
The doctor is in.
The doctor is in! Wind up your radio. I'm Dr. Demento with mad music and crazy comedy from out the vaults and off the wall. Rare records on outrageous tapes for yesterday, today, and tomorrow. This week we'll have a salute to the Demento year 1986 with some great comedy hits that made their debut that year and a couple we haven't heard since then. Whimsical Will have his annual salute to the Big Summer Monster movie, always a highlight. Got a lot of very demented new songs and lots of old favorites by request. Now, we usually play this one at Halloween, but I thought, heck, June can be a scary time of year, too. We're playing it this week for Jason in Great Falls and Ryan in Rochelle. Here's Flippy T. Fishhead.
There's a full moon in the pasture tonight. Hangs like a fine and polished pearl, so pure and white. The average guy finds so much beauty in its life. But I'm a werecow. Moo, moo, moo. I'm a werecow. Now I'm stuck.
Well, let's listen to some of Hansen's own words.
Comedy music now seems to be an underground thing. It's almost like rock and roll was in its very early days, something that happened kind of a little bit outside the mainstream of the music business. It's very much like hip-hop was in its early days, again, something that happened very much outside the mainstream. It's a little like the way folk music developed. I grew up and went to high school in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Then I moved on to Reed College in Portland, Oregon, my first trip to the West Coast. And I was there from 59 to 63. Graduated with a major in music, meaning classical music. Wrote a thesis about the 20th century opera. Well, you got to see this new singer. He's singing at this coffee house here. His name is Bob Dylan. He hadn't written Blowin' in the Wind or any of those yet, but definitely he was somebody far out of the ordinary. Portland, Oregon wasn't exactly the center of it, but we had our own folk scene there in Portland, and I collected records and started writing for a fanzine, which was based back in my hometown in Minneapolis. This was in 1960, started writing for the Little Sandy Review, which fanzines yet, but that is absolutely what it was. And it was the first publication of any kind that wrote about Bob Dylan. I got a master's degree from UCLA, writing a thesis about how rock and roll was descended in part from blues music, kind of tracing the connections between blues and rock and roll. It was a very exciting time in the history of rock and roll, the middle of the 60s, especially in Los Angeles. There was a whole lot going on. A lot of bands were really changing things very rapidly, and some of them I became friends with, and I wound up being a roadie for a group called Spirit. Actually, I helped contribute to a couple of their songs, wrote a verse here and there for a couple of their songs. And I was also involved with another band that made some albums called Can Heat, and they're still remembered today. You can still buy their albums. And, those were heavy times because I had a lot of old records, early hits from the beginning of rock and roll, and old songs with stories behind them, like old blues that the Rolling Stones had covered, that sort of thing. So I would come in and tell stories behind these records, and the station promoted me as somebody who had this huge record collection.
Such a stinking privilege once again to introduce you to certainly the smartest man in Southern California. Ladies and gentlemen, Doctor.
What I'm really here to do is just do what may be the most demented thing of all, is to just turn all the people of Los Angeles, and I hope America, on to a wider experience in this thing called music, and a realization that the world of music does not necessarily stop with what you hear on most of the other radio stations in this city, and just a wish to take beautiful advantage of a very beautiful radio station, which is perhaps one of the very few. And I brought in a few funny records like Transfusion because they had interesting stories behind them in many cases. And I quickly found that those were the ones that got requested the most. I had no idea at that time that I'd even be on the next week, never mind 30 years from then. After doing 3 months of weekly guest appearances, the phones were pretty much ringing off the wall when I was on, so they decided to give me my own program on Sunday nights, and it would be called the Dr. Demento Show.
Barrett Eugene Hansen. A lot more than just funny, and a lot more than just Dr. Demento. Well, let's listen to a track that this son of Minneapolis loves, and that helped earn him his reputation on the air in those early days. And that's a recording of Nervous Norvus, Transfusion, from 1956.
Tooling down the highway doing 79. I'm a twin pipe papa and I'm feeling fine. Hey man, dig that. Was that a red stop sign? Transfusion, I'm just a solid mess of contusions. Never, never, never gonna speed again. Slip the blood to me, bud. I jump in my rod about 8:45. I gotta make a date with that chick of mine. I cross the center line, man, you gotta make time. Transfusion, oh man, I got the cotton picking convolutions. I'm never, never, never gonna speed again. Shoot the juice to me, Bruce. My foot's on the throttle and it's made of lead, but I'm a fast riding daddy with a real cool head. I'm a gonna pass a truck on the hill ahead. Transfusion, my red corpuscles are in mass confusion. Never, never, never gonna speed again. Pour the crimson in me, Jimson. I took a little drink and I'm a feeling right. I can fly right over everything, everything in sight. There's a slow poking cat I'm gonna pass.
Well, that was Transfusion by Nervous Norvus, one of the early favorites of Barrett Hansen on what would become the Dr. Demento Show, on his early guest hosts and broadcasts from California. Well, is the Dr. Demento Show still on the air? Is Barrett Hansen still alive? Yes, Barrett Hansen is still alive, and he is around 79 years of age at the time of our broadcast today. Is the Dr. Demento Show still on the air? Well, that's a little bit more complicated. Westwood One Radio has changed ownership a number of times and now has offices in Silver Spring, Maryland. I had the great fortune of meeting some folks from Westwood One Unfortunately, Dr. Demento was not one of them. The program continued under a different production company, which was actually a ghost production company created by Hansen, for some time until listenership dropped. Beginning in about 2006, the Dr. Demento Show began offering pay-per-show audio streaming at the show's official website. Large archives from 1992 to the present, as well as few select archives from the early 70s, are available, but most of the syndicated programs from 78 to 92 are not, because the broadcast rights are currently in limbo through various lawsuits. Cumulus Media purchased Westwood One in the early 2010s, but spun off several of its music shows to Compass Media Networks. Well, at the end of the show's run on broadcast radio, only about 6 stations carried the program, from well over 100 at its peak. If you visit the official website drdemento.com, you will find information about Hansen, as well as the ability to join a club with membership where you can pay to access streams of his shows and listen to his current broadcasts. I understand that that is very different than the way that we look at radio as a free and accessible medium for all. However, these are Hansen's proprietary recordings, and he was somewhat wronged by the radio industry commercially in his experience, and at least in the end, it is he alone that can monetize his broadcasts, programs, and knowledge, as well as access to his collection of over 85,000 historical and rare LP records. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's episode of Radio Ranger. I hope you enjoyed it. Perhaps you'll take some time to learn some more about Hansen, listen to his programs, or maybe it just took you down memory lane. Thanks for joining me. Dr. Demento might not be on the air on FM AM anymore, but the memories he created for hundreds of thousands of people will live on forever. Remember, don't listen to my radio show. Listen to everyone else's.